Hello, a quiet evening settled over the Troyanovs' apartment. Outside, darkness fell, the city lit up its lights, and in the cozy living room, only a floor lamp glowed, casting a warm circle on the knitted blanket of the sofa. Daria sat with her legs tucked under, staring into the void. Fatigue from a day at the beauty salon weighed heavily on her shoulders. From her son's room came steady, slightly raspy breathing. Leosha had finally fallen asleep after a week of exhausting illness. Thoughts of endless coughing, runny nose, and hospital visits stirred a familiar heaviness in her chest. Overall, she felt happy. Work, though tiring, was enjoyable. She saw clients leave with beautiful hairstyles and smiles, and her son, despite his fragile health, was her joy. Kirill, her husband, was a good father and, in general, a life partner. But those endless late nights at work, important position, urgent meetings, unforeseen circumstances had become the soundtrack to their evenings. Today he was late again. Dasha sighed, glancing at the clock. It showed 9:30, though Kirill had promised to be home by 7. The sound of a key in the lock made her startle. A moment later, footsteps and the rustle of a jacket came from the hallway. Kirill appeared in the living room doorway, his face drawn, his voice weary, his tie dangling on an unbuttoned shirt. Hey. His voice was low, drained of energy. Hey, Dasha replied, trying to keep her irritation from showing, but it slipped through anyway. Late again, Kirill sank heavily into the armchair across from her and ran a hand over his face. Yeah, heading another project now. My head spinning. How's Leosha? He fell asleep, Dasha reported. Temperature's down, but the cough's still bad. I booked him for the doctor tomorrow morning. Good thing you're home to take him. Kirill reached for the TV remote, but changed his mind, leaving it on the table. Listen, I saw the new neighbors in the elevator today, the ones who moved in a couple of days ago. Dasha nodded. They were a man and woman about 5 years younger than them, no kids. She'd seen them briefly a couple of times. He was fit in expensive sneakers. She was a tall blonde with a cold, detached expression. They never greeted, only exchanged quick, meaningless glances. Daria assumed they were husband and wife, so she asked, they seemed like nice people. Kirill shrugged. I think his name's Artyom. The neighbor didn't introduce herself. Kirill hesitated. I was thinking maybe we should visit them, get acquainted. We live a few meters apart after all. The suggestion caught her off guard. Visit Dasha, repeated, not hiding her surprise. Seriously, Kirill, you just dragged yourself home exhausted like you've been unloading wagons all day. Why now? Kirill countered, but without much conviction. Maybe on the weekend. Just talk, have tea. We should build some contact. It's awkward living wall to wall and not knowing each other. Awkward, Dasha's voice rose involuntarily, but she stopped, listening to the silence in the nursery. Kirill, they haven't shown any initiative themselves. Maybe they don't want contact. They'll survive. I think they'd be glad if we showed some courtesy, her husband persisted. His fatigue was obvious, but his eyes held a strange spark, unusual for such evenings. You're so keen on neighborly courtesy, but you come home when everyone's asleep. Courtesy starts at home, Kiryush. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Oh, don't start. You know how much work I have. He said through gritted teeth. Yeah. Work. Dasha waved her hand, feeling a familiar wave of resentment rise, but she had no strength to argue. Fine if you really want to, let's go. The decision solidified by Friday. Watching Kirill's tired face over dinner and hearing another cough from their son's room, Dasha suddenly thought that visiting new people to unwind might not be a bad idea. Maybe Saturday evening, she suggested clearing the plates. We'll need to send Lyosha somewhere. He has school, after all. Kirill perked up, his fatigue seeming to lift for a moment. Great. We'll ask Mom. She loves hanging out with him. He smiled. Olga Viktorovna answered the call with joyful enthusiasm, as always when her grandson was mentioned. Of course, Dazhenka. I'll happily pick him up from school. We'll walk, feed our squirrels in the park, look at the swans. They say they have cygnets. Now then, come to our place for dinner. You go meet them calmly. Kirill's right, you need to know your neighbors. The pleased woman chirped. Dasha hung up, feeling relieved. Olga Viktorovna was a reliable support. Lyosha loved these walks with his grandma, so her son would be in safe hands and happy. Saturday evening was cool. Dasha nervously adjusted her dress in front of the mirror. Kirill, unusually home on time, looked a bit stiff. Ready to go, he asked, holding a box of chocolates. Let's go. Dasha sighed, feeling an inexplicable knot of anxiety tighten in her throat. She pressed the doorbell. The sound seemed deafeningly loud in the quiet stairwell. After a few agonizing seconds, the door opened. A tall, slender blonde stood in the doorway, wearing perfectly fitted jeans and a loose pastel sweater. Her face was beautiful, but as detached as ever, like it was sculpted from cold porcelain. Yes, her voice was flat, without question or warmth. Hello, Kirill smiled, stepping forward. We're your neighbors, the Troyanovs. I'm Kirill. This is Dasha. We thought we'd introduce ourselves. Anastasia, the neighbor said, stepping back. Come in. The apartment struck them immediately, not with chaos or discomfort, but with its sterility. The cleanliness was impeccable, gleaming. The furniture was modern, expensive, but minimalist, like it was fresh from a showroom. Not a single extra item, no trinkets, and silence, the same oppressive silence as always, now filling the space. In the living room where they were invited, Artyom stood tall and fit in dark jeans and a turtleneck. Nastya gestured to a low sofa. Tea or coffee tea, please? Dasha replied, trying to sound natural. She sank onto the sofa, her gaze involuntarily scanning the room. To her surprise, there wasn't a single photo not on the wall shelves or tables. In the Troyanovs' home, by contrast, there was a shrine of Lyosha's pictures. Her eyes automatically fell on Anastasia's hands as she set down the cups. Long manicured fingers, but no gold band, not even a simple ring. Dasha quickly shifted her gaze to Artyom's hands as he sat in the armchair across from Kirill. Nothing there, either. Not on the right ring finger or the left. Were they really married? A shadow of doubt flickered in her mind. Who were they then? Siblings, colleagues, just roommates? But in their demeanor, in how they occupied the room's space, there wasn't a hint of familial warmth or even casual closeness. They existed side by side, not together. You moved in recently, Kirill started trying to break the silence that settled after Nastya poured the tea. How do you like it here? About a month ago, Artyom replied. Quiet area, good transport access. We're fine with it. And have you been together long? Dasha asked, hating herself for the question, but unable to curb her curiosity fueled by the lack of rings and photos. She felt her husband tense slightly. Anastasia raised her cold eyes to her. The pause was a bit longer than needed for a simple answer. Long enough, she said evenly, taking a sip of tea. Neither confirmation nor denial. No, we're married. No, we're dating just long enough. We work in the same field, Artyom added, as if offering some explanation. IT company. The conversation dragged like trudging through a swamp. Kirill tried to talk about work, but the neighbors responded with vague phrases. Dasha felt increasingly awkward. Her inner detective against her will was working overtime. She caught the glances Artyom and Anastasia exchanged, quick assessing, without a trace of affection or even simple attachment. Something was off. What was it, and why did it bother her so much? The thought kept echoing in her head. She caught herself staring at their hands again and realized she was uncomfortable. Uncomfortable with this digging, this suspicion, this urge to uncover something. She didn't want to be that nosy neighbor prying into others' lives. Maybe they just had that kind of relationship. Maybe they didn't like showing emotions or wearing rings. Maybe they hadn't hung photos yet. 1,000 excuses raced through her mind, but none stuck crashing against the stone wall of their detachment and this empty, impersonal apartment. The evening dragged on torturously. Kirill, suddenly animated, was eagerly discussing something about corporate strategies and markets with the neighbor. His face glowed with an enthusiasm Dasha hadn't seen at home in a long time. At that moment, she caught a strange glance, quick as a lightning flash. Anastasia, sitting diagonally in an armchair, slightly raised her eyes from the teaspoon she was twirling, and looked at Kirill, not at Artyom, her supposed husband, but at Kirill. The glance wasn't just quick, it was loaded with a silent question, impatience, and perhaps even reproach. And the strangest part, Kirill, without breaking his conversation with Artyom, blinked almost imperceptibly. Dasha froze. Her heart pounded like a hammer on an anvil. What was that? A few minutes later, the situation repeated. Kirill was animatedly explaining something, gesturing, and Anastasia glanced at him again. This time, her thin brows shifted slightly, and again, an almost imperceptible blink from Kirill, quick, precise, like they were exchanging some secret. And her husband kept talking to the neighbors naturally as if nothing happened. But Dasha noticed. She saw this strange, silent dialogue happening right in front of them. She was sure these movements didn't escape Artyom either, yet he sat as if nothing occurred. Suddenly the phone rang. It was Olga Viktorovna. Dasha jumped up with relief. Hello? Everything okay? Yes, Dashenka, everything's great. Came a warm, slightly excited voice. Lyoshenka and I just got back from the park. He's a bit tired, but very happy. Listen, I was thinking, since you're visiting, maybe he could stay over. We'll play watch cartoons, and I'll make pancakes in the morning. You and Kiryusha can rest. Lyosha won't be any trouble. What trouble? Only joy, Olga Viktorovna brushed off. Thank you. Dasha's voice filled with sincere gratitude. She returned to the conversation feeling a bit freer. Mom offered to keep Lyosha tonight, she told Kirill. He paused his talk for a second, his face lighting up with a smile. Great Artyom smiled meanwhile. Olga Viktorovna led her grandson by the hand along a path to their house. Evening shadows stretched, and the air carried the scent of damp earth and early buds. Lyosha, tired but content, walked beside her, chattering about swans and a bold squirrel. Grandma, is Dad home today? He asked suddenly, looking at swaying branches. Nobody, Dad and Mom, went to visit the new neighbors. Remember, I told you. Olga Viktorovna replied, gently patting his head. To that lady, Lyosha wrinkled his nose as if recalling something unpleasant. What lady? His grandma tensed. That tall, light-haired one who never smiles. Lyosha lowered his voice to a confidential whisper. Grandma, can I tell you a secret? Of course, Sunshine, tell me. She smiled. The boy glanced around as if afraid of being overheard, even in the empty park, and whispered, I saw Dad with that lady. They were whispering by the entrance. And once, he hesitated. Once, what Olga Viktorovna stopped and crouched to look him in the eyes. Once, they seemed to kiss. Lyosha blurted it out and quickly covered his mouth with his hand. In her car. I saw from my room's window. Olga Viktorovna felt like she'd been punched in the gut. The world spun for a moment. Kirill kissing the neighbor, impossible. Her first reaction was disbelief. Her son, a loving husband and father. But a child wouldn't make this up. Lyosha wasn't a fantasizer. He was an impressionable boy, but never a liar. A cold wave of anger, disappointment, and fear for Dasha washed over her. Olga Viktorovna barely held herself together. Her hands gripped her grandson's small ones. Lyoshenka, her voice trembled as she tried to compose herself. My dear, are you sure maybe it just seemed like it? Maybe Dad was whispering something to her, or fixing something. Kissing is serious. Lyosha frowned. No, Grandma. It wasn't just that he shook his head. Olga Viktorovna closed her eyes. No more doubts. But why do this? Why take a mistress next door? It was madness. She stood taking her grandson's hand tighter. She had to act, but how to tell her daughter-in-law shattering her world when she was already worn out by her son's illness work, and her husband's constant delays, this news would kill her. And Lyosha shouldn't witness a massive scandal. Lyoshenka listened carefully. Olga Viktorovna stopped. What you saw is grown-up stuff, and we don't know exactly what happened yet. Understand. Maybe Dad was just happy to see that lady. She didn't believe her own words, but needed to calm the child. So let's not tell anyone for now, especially Mom. She's already worried enough, and if we tell her, she'll get upset and might cry. We don't want that, right? Lyosha looked into his grandma's eyes, filled with adult anxiety he didn't understand. The thought of upsetting Mom scared him most. We don't, he whispered. Exactly. Olga Viktorovna hugged him, hiding her face in his soft hair so he wouldn't see her trembling lips. We'll keep this secret for now, and I'll try to figure it out. Promise to stay quiet, I promise. Lyosha nodded, feeling the weight of a grown-up secret on his shoulders. Good boy. Let's go. I'll make you cocoa with marshmallows. Grandma stood trying to smile, but it came out crooked, forced. Her heart tore between love for her son, pity for her daughter-in-law, and a fierce desire to protect her grandson from the coming storm. Meanwhile, in the neighbor's apartment, Dasha caught another strange glance, quick as a snake strike, between Anastasia and Kirill. She didn't know about the secret her son had just shared with his grandma, but the atmosphere of lies and some dangerous game was thickening behind that flawless door. With every minute. Thanks for the tea. Dasha set her nearly untouched cup on the table, feeling she couldn't stay any longer. We should go. Of course, Kirill clearly sees the excuse. It was great to meet you. If you need anything, we're nearby. Thanks. Artyom stood, his smile unchanged. Good evening. Anastasia only nodded. At the door, as they left it closed behind them with a soft click. Dasha took a deep breath of the cool stairwell air, like surfacing from underwater. Well, Kirill asked, descending the stairs. What did you think of them? Dasha was silent for a few seconds. Strange, she exhaled finally. Very strange. Didn't you notice no photos, no rings? Her husband shrugged. Maybe they don't wear them or don't like photos. People are different. But they're polite and reasonable. No rowdiness, no noise. What more do you need? He shrugged. Dasha didn't reply. The unpleasant aftertaste of the visit, a mix of confusion and slight disgust with herself for her curiosity, lingered. The walk back from the neighbor's apartment passed in oppressive silence. Dasha kept her gaze on the floor, every cell tense. Kirill's behavior that evening wasn't just suspicious, it was insulting. He didn't just flirt with Anastasia. He caught every glance, laughed at her rare icy remarks. And she accepted his attention as if entitled, occasionally tossing him a look that Dasha sensed held disdainful curiosity. Artyom, meanwhile, watched this game like an indifferent spectator. At home, a scandal erupted, quiet, restrained, but all the more devastating. "Have you lost your mind?" Dasha hissed as soon as the hallway door slammed shut. "The whole evening you were wagging your tail at that doll. Do you realize how it looked?" Kirill, shrugging off his jacket, turned away. "What are you talking about? We talk normally. By the way, she's a smart conversationalist, knows finance," he countered. "Finance." Dasha laughed, and it sounded hysterical. "She only knows how to keep her distance and look down her nose. Or, do you like that type cold, unattainable, stop-talking nonsense?" Kirill snapped, his face reddening. "It was just neighborly courtesy. I just wanted to keep the conversation going. You meanwhile acted like a boring old lady, silent the whole time." "Silent? What was I supposed to do? Watch my husband flirt with a married woman or whoever she is?" Dasha caught herself shouting and lowered her voice, lost in doubt. Her husband waved his hand demonstratively, heading to the bathroom. "I'm tired. I don't want to discuss this anymore." "You're paranoid. Go to bed," he said. Dasha stood in the living room, tears of angry helplessness welling up. Sleep wouldn't come. She tossed, listening to Kirill's steady breathing, which now seemed fake. The clock struck 3 and suddenly movement. Her husband cautiously sat up, froze, listened, then slid off the bed, stepping barefoot onto the carpet. He didn't go to the bathroom or kitchen, but headed to the window overlooking the narrow strip of their shared garden with the neighbors. Dasha held her breath, pretending to sleep. Through half-closed eyelids, she saw his silhouette. He opened the window slightly. The quiet creak of the frame was deafening in the night silence. He froze, staring into the darkness, then whispered, barely audible, "Nastya, you..." "There." Dasha's heart stopped, then raced ready to burst from her chest. From the darkness of the garden by the neighbor's window came a reply, a female voice, cold and clear. "I'm here." That familiar tone. "I can't do this anymore." Kirill whispered, his voice raw with genuine torment. "My wife suspects something." "Hold it together." Nastya's whisper lacked sympathy, sounding like an order. "Work is work. Feel and stay out of it. You knew what you signed up for." "But why flirt like that in front of her?" Kirill almost groaned. It was provocation. "You saw how she looked." A short, dry chuckle came from the darkness. "What you didn't like it, I needed a reaction. Your little Dasha's jealous and observant. That complicates things, but it's not critical. Just keep her calm. Talk about urgent projects, business as usual?" Anastasia replied cynically. Dasha clenched her fists under the blanket nails, digging into her palms. "What about Artyom Kirill?" asked cautiously. Nastia's voice grew colder. "My brother does what I say, always. He's grateful I pulled him out of that pit after prison. Without me, he'd have rotted there or gone back. You know your attention to me is just part of the plan." Fragments of phrases pounded in Dasha's mind, forming a monstrous mosaic. "Not lovers, brother and sister." The silence grew heavy, chilling. Dasha didn't breathe, feeling cold sweat trickle down her back. "I get it." Kirill whispered, his voice hollow. His silhouette at the window slumped. "Good boy." Nastya's whisper was almost affectionate. "Now go sleep with your wife and keep playing your role. We'll discuss the next transfer's details tomorrow." Footsteps faded in the yard. Nastya vanished, and Kirill stood by the window motionless as a stone statue. Dasha closed her eyes tightly, trying to breathe evenly, feigning sleep. She heard him lie down, cautiously sigh, and his breathing grow steady again. Inside her, everything raged. What she'd suspected was true, but the truth was 1,000 times worse than any suspicion, not just an affair, but a double life, likely tied to crime. The morning after that night, Dasha woke with the sensation of fragile glass inside. Every movement, every sound, the clink of a cup, Kirill's footsteps in the hallway, his routine "good morning" cracked that inner crystal. From the start of the day, he was livid about his boss, Sergei Mironov. According to Kirill, he hadn't just denied him a big bonus, but humiliated him in front of the board. Waiting until his wife went to the bathroom, Kirill contacted Nastya. He'd bought her and her brother an apartment with his secret account nearby for quick meetings. "I want him to pay for what he did," Troyanov growled. "I don't care about the consequences. I'm ready for even the harshest plan." Finally showing some spine, Anastasia smirked, suggesting they discuss details at a proper meeting. Dasha, who'd left the door ajar to eavesdrop, covered her mouth. She sensed something bad was coming. Dasha sank to the floor, clutching her head. A decision formed quickly on the edge of despair. She couldn't stay silent. She had to act urgently. Her husband's office greeted her with corporate bustle. Her heart pounded so loud she thought passers-by could hear it. "I need to see Sergei Anatolyevich. It's urgent," she told the secretary, trying to sound firm. The young woman at the computer gave her a polite but indifferent look. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked. "No, but it's very important," Dasha insisted. "Without an appointment, Sergei Anatolyevich doesn't see anyone. His schedule's booked weeks ahead." "I can slot you in." The secretary glanced at her monitor. "Wednesday, 2 weeks from now." "Is he in the office today?" Dasha asked, ignoring the previous remark. "Sergei Anatolyevich is on a business trip. He'll be back tomorrow evening," she replied like a robot. Dasha sighed heavily. She'd done all she could, but it seemed fate was against justice prevailing. The next day at work, she could barely focus. Her hands trembled, scissors slipped from her fingers. Dasha mentally ran through options, each seeming like a dead end. Suddenly, a man appeared at the salon's entrance, tall, confident, in a perfectly tailored suit. She recognized him instantly as her husband's boss, having seen him at corporate events. Her heart raced. Dasha froze by her chair, hoping he'd come to her. It would have been a perfect chance, but glancing around, he nodded to Tanya, the priciest stylist. Dasha felt the ground slip away. He was here meters from her, but untouchable. She saw him settle comfortably in the chair, Tanya adjusting his cape. He chatted about something light-hearted, laughed not at all like someone in danger. An idea struck like lightning. Dasha grabbed a scrap of client notepaper and a pen. Her hands shook the letters jagged, but she wrote quickly, scribbling everything she knew to warn him about Kirill. She folded the note into quarters, clutched it in her fist, pretended to adjust a towel on the rack by the coat stand, and in a flash slipped the crumpled note into the right pocket of Mironov's elegant jacket. Tanya's session was wrapping up. Sergei stood, stretched, paid generously, leaving a tip, and headed to the coat rack. Dasha, standing at her station pretending to organize tools, watched his every move. Her palms were icy and damp. He reached into his pocket for his car keys, and his fingers seemed to brush the paper. He pulled it out, unfolded it. Dasha froze, watching his face. He scanned the text and smirked condescendingly with slight disdain. He shook his head, crumpled the note into a tight ball, and tossed it into the nearest trash bin for papers by the receptionist's desk. Dasha sank onto a stool, feeling hot, betraying tears roll down her cheeks. She'd done everything she could, but he was too confident in his invincibility. Mironov didn't see the shadow already looming over him. A few hours later, Dasha walked through a hospital wing, heading to the ICU, where Olga Viktorovna lay pale, her face contorted, tangled in tubes and wires. One side of her body was immobile. Her eyes, full of terror and silent questions, met her daughter-in-law's. Olga Viktorovna Dasha felt tears choke her. A young doctor approached. Stroke quite extensive. Speech may recover, but not immediately, if at all. Motor functions on the right side are currently impaired, he reported. Dasha nodded, unable to speak. Another burden on her, already bent back. She felt trapped walls closing in. Despite her mother-in-law's solid age, there'd never been health concerns. Olga Viktorovna was a robust woman who rarely complained, but a conversation with her son had deeply shaken her. You're destroying your family. You can't do this. She'd tried to steer him right. What are you even talking about? Kirill brushed her off. Everything's fine. She had to recount what she'd learned from her grandson. Kirill paled, then flushed. Nonsense. You're losing it, or Dasha's got you riled up. She's been driving herself crazy with jealousy. He stood. Leave me alone and stay out of my business. That's when Olga Viktorovna had her attack. Her son, frightened, called doctors, but her health was still gravely damaged. Dasha stayed by her mother-in-law's bedside, caring for her as the doctor advised. Olga Viktorovna looked at her with pleading, tear-filled eyes. Her lips moved, trying to say something, but she couldn't. Suddenly, the phone buzzed, showing an unknown number. "Hello?" Dasha asked, stepping into the corridor. "This is Sergei." His voice was sharp, without its former confidence. "I need to meet you urgently. Are you at work? I'm at the hospital. My mother-in-law..." She didn't finish. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. He exhaled. "Wait for me. It's important." Mironov waited in his expensive but rumpled SUV. His face was gray with dark circles from fatigue and fear. His former arrogance was gone. "Get in," he said as Dasha approached. She sat in the passenger seat, smelling of leather and expensive tobacco. "Yesterday," he began, staring ahead, "someone tried to kill me. Driving my brakes failed completely. I barely managed to steer. Mechanics said someone tampered with them so carefully, the failure only happened under load." Dasha closed her eyes. She had no doubt it was her husband and his accomplices doing. "After that, I remembered your note," he said, turning to her. "No need to deny it. I know it was yours. You know something, Dasha didn't even think of denying it." She told everything she knew. Though she didn't know this man personally, she'd heard so much about him from her husband that she didn't want Sergei to suffer. Mironov slammed his fist on the steering wheel. "I knew something was off with him. His financial reports were always too murky, but I lacked direct proof. 2 others were also under suspicion." He frowned, gripping the wheel. Dasha watched his emotions closely. You could see his mind racing, planning. "Please be careful," the businessman said, suddenly finally turning to her. "These people seem capable of anything." Fresh anxiety flared inside her. "You take care, too." Returning home late, Dasha froze at the nursery's threshold. Lyosha was asleep, but on his pillow lay a new, unfamiliar toy, a sinister, bright plastic monster with sharp teeth. Beside it, a note. "What a wonderful son you have, Daria. So lively, curious. It's good when children are safe. I hope he doesn't like wandering alone. Artyom, by the way, loves kids, so we'll gladly keep an eye on him. You never know what could happen to a little boy these days. It's a dangerous time." The note slipped from her numb fingers. Dasha grabbed the door frame to keep from falling. This was a real threat, and though the note was anonymous, it was obvious its author was right next door. That plastic monster grinning by Lyosha's pillow was the last straw. She couldn't breathe this air steeped in lies and fear anymore. She had to flee now. Lyosha was asleep when Dasha gently woke him, pressing a finger to her lips. "What's wrong?" he whispered, trying to wake up. "Lyosh, we're leaving," she replied, trying to sound calm. "Don't worry, it's just for a bit. A little adventure. Just get ready quietly so Dad doesn't hear. He's very tired, so we shouldn't wake him." Her voice trembled. "Get dressed and grab your teddy." She saw fear flicker in her son's eyes, like he sensed something, but his trust in her was stronger. Lyosha nodded and began dressing in the dark without questions. Packing took 10 minutes. 2 backpacks with essentials documents, money medicine, nothing extra. Dasha left a short note on the kitchen table. They slipped out of the apartment like shadows. The elevator felt like a clanging trap, so they took the stairs. The cold night air hit her face, but was clean free from the neighbor's oppressive walls. She gripped Lyosha's hand tightly. Morning found them in a rented apartment in an old district on the other side of the city, small, uncomfortable, but safe. Dasha sat by the window, staring at gray rooftops, trying to process what they'd done. Her phone was off. She was afraid to turn it on. Meanwhile, Olga Viktorovna came to. Her condition improved, and her first words were a request for a notary. An elderly woman with a tired but professional gaze arrived an hour later. Using her left hand, Olga Viktorovna with difficulty but legibly wrote a statement. She renounced all her property apartment dacha savings in favor of Dasha, solely for her, so nothing would go to Kirill. Olga Viktorovna, no Dasha, gasped when the notary read the draft. "It's all yours." "How can this be?" Her mother-in-law shook her head, making a guttural, desperate sound. "My girl, listen." She exhaled. "My son," she said it with regret. "I'm afraid he'll lose everything someday. What he's doing will catch up with him. But if it's all yours, I'll rest easier." Tears streamed from Dasha's eyes. Her bedridden mother-in-law thought not of herself, but of her criminal son. The notary watched silently, then carefully placed the documents before Olga Viktorovna. "You confirm your intent. This is your voluntary choice?" she asked mechanically. "Yes," the mother-in-law said firmly. When Dasha returned to the rented apartment with swollen eyes and a folder of documents, her phone finally turned on, exploded with calls and messages. Dozens of missed calls from Kirill. His voicemail started puzzled, then angry, then spiraling into hysterical rage. Dasha turned it off again and leaned against the cold wall, looking at her sleeping son. She held a decision that gave them a roof over their heads when everything collapsed, and the weight of that gift mixed with anger at Kirill, fear for her son, and endless pain for her mother-in-law was almost unbearable. The apartment's silence was no longer oppressive, but tense humming with anticipation. Dasha lived like under siege, rarely going out, always looking over her shoulder. One evening, as she tried to get her son to eat a spoonful of soup, the phone buzzed. "Darya, it's Sergey." His voice was restrained but tense. "Glad I found you. Don't worry, I'm alone. Can I come? I have important news." He stood at the door in a simple jacket without his usual polish. His eyes quickly scanned the shabby surroundings. "You did the right thing leaving," he said without preamble. "Your husband isn't just a schemer. He's a link to much more serious people. Do you know what his shadow business is? He launders money through shell companies. And your neighbors," he pointed at a photo of Artyom and Nastya, taken by a hidden camera at the entrance. "He's a thug ready to use force, and she's the brains. And your husband's on her hook." He gave Dasha a knowing look, free of judgment. "My people recorded a meeting at a hotel." Dasha turned away, feeling a burning wave of shame and anger. Confirmation of her suspicions was like a knife to the heart. "What now?" she asked dully. Now the game's over, Mironov replied, putting away his tablet. I have enough evidence to go to the police. They'll answer fully. The next day, a sting operation began. Police cars with flashing lights stood at the entrance. Figures in bulletproof vests surrounded Artyom, who'd stepped out to smoke. He didn't resist, only lowered his head grimly as handcuffs clicked on his wrists. He was roughly shoved into a car. Dasha looked for Nastya. She was nowhere, vanished like a ghost. Their second-floor apartment windows stayed dark, impenetrable. Police carried out boxes of computers, folders, and anything that could be evidence. That same day, Dasha filed for divorce. Since Kirill was under house arrest, awaiting trial, she acted through a lawyer. She wasn't upset. After everything, she didn't want to see her husband. The events of recent days finished Olga Viktorovna. She passed quietly in her sleep, her stroke-weakened heart simply stopping. Dasha, getting the hospital's call, came to say goodbye to this strong, unhappy woman who'd tried to protect them until the end. Kirill wasn't at the funeral. Police didn't allow it. Only a few of her mother-in-law's old friends and Dasha, with Lyosha, who cried quietly, not fully grasping why Grandma was gone. A week later, the same notary came to Dasha with a thick folder. Daria Nikolaevna, you need to sign inheritance documents. Apartment, bank account, dacha. Plot the woman listed. But Dasha interrupted with a voice that brooked no argument. I refuse it all, she said clearly. The notary raised her eyebrows in surprise. Are you sure this could secure your son's future? She couldn't help saying, as such cases were rare in her practice. I'm sure, Dasha said firmly. The woman shrugged. You're right. Then per law, if the sole first-degree heir refuses the deceased son as a convicted felon, is barred from inheritance, and the property is deemed escheated. It goes. She glanced at the papers to the city's social fund for supporting orphaned children. Dasha nodded. She didn't care. She signed the refusal boldly, decisively. When the notary left, she approached the window. A fine, clean rain fell outside, washing dust from the asphalt and tree leaves. Mom, will we ever go home? Lyosha asked quietly a few days later. She looked at her son, then out the window at the city's wet rooftops, now a clean slate for them. We're already home, son. Our home's just different now. She smiled. Dasha was full of hope to start anew. She didn't want to return to the old apartment where every inch reminded her of the lies she'd lived in for so long. A couple of months passed before she fully recovered. Dasha no longer worked at the old salon. Sergei, after the ordeal with Kirill and their neighbors, saw in her not just a victim, but a person of incredible strength. He offered her a job at his company, first a modest HR role, then recognizing her organizational skills and ability to connect with people, entrusted her with managing a corporate charity fund. The work was meaningful, providing stability and respect. Between them, survivors of a shared storm, something grew beyond gratitude or business partnership. It wasn't a lightning bolt, but a slow dawn after a long, dark night. Sergei and Dasha walked side by side, stepping cautiously over past ruins, bound first by trust, then by a deep, almost imperceptible need for peace they found only in each other. He became her quiet harbor after the nightmare with Kirill, betrayal, and fear. His reliability was a balm. He never made empty promises, but when he said, I'll handle it, he did. Once, after a particularly tough day tied to Kirill's trial, Dasha broke down crying in his kitchen by the stove. He silently approached, turned off the kettle about to boil, and hugged her tightly in a strong, wordless way. For Sergei, Dasha was a revelation. Used to calculation, aggression, and the falseness of big business, she was genuine strong in her vulnerability. wise in her simplicity and endlessly devoted to her son. He knew she'd refuse the inheritance not out of pride, but principle. He saw her kindness at the fund her ability to listen and help not for money, but from the heart. One day, watching her laugh at some silly thing Leosha did, her eyes sparkling dimples playing at her lips' corners, Sergei thought, I want to see that smile every morning, always. Leosha grew strengthened. The shadow of fear nearly vanished from his eyes, though he remained quiet and observant. They lived in a bright apartment owned by Sergei. They tried not to dwell on the past. Kirill got his sentence 7 years in a strict regime prison. Artyom, as a repeat offender, was sent there too for a long time. There was no trace of Nastya. Dasha's old love for hairstyling didn't fade. On weekends, she sometimes worked at a small, cozy salon nearby. It was her outlet, a return to her roots, to what she always did well, making people prettier and more confident. One Saturday, as evening neared, the salon emptied. Colleagues left, the receptionist stepped out. Dasha was tidying up, preparing to close and head home. The entrance bell rang unexpectedly. We're closing, Dasha called without turning, wiping a mirror. Oh, please, a female voice whined, deliberately pitiful. I'm in a terrible bind. My friend's wedding's tomorrow, and I look like a scarecrow. Help, I beg you. A haircut styling, half an hour max. Dasha turned. A woman stood in the doorway in large dark sunglasses and an unnaturally black, long straight wig falling almost to her waist. Her face was hidden under thick makeup, lips bright red. She looked odd, but the desperation in her voice seemed genuine. Dasha's heart softened. Fine, come in, she sighed, waving her in. Sit, but really quick, I'm in a hurry. At that moment, as if confirming her words, her phone buzzed. A message from Sergei lit up the screen. He missed her terribly. A happy smile spread across Dasha's face. She was in love, and the feeling warmed her soul. The client walked to the chair, moving stiffly. She removed her glasses. Her eyes under heavily made-up lashes were cold, empty, and painfully familiar. Dasha froze, dropping the cloth. Icy terror ran down her spine. Nastya. She exhaled. A crooked, malicious smile twisted the lips under the wig. Hello, Dashenka. I've been looking for you a long time. A very long time. Her voice lost its softness, turning metallic. You ruined everything. You got Kirill locked up, sent my brother there too. You destroyed everything, and you'll pay for it. She stood abruptly. From the folds of her long coat, professional hairdressing scissors, sharp ones, fell. Dasha flinched, her heart pounding. Nastya, don't. The police are looking for you. Leave while you can, she said nervously, stepping back instinctively. My dear, Anastasia bared her teeth. I learned one good lesson in life. It's never too late. She lunged at Dasha, the blades flashing. Dasha dodged, but her smock caught on the chair. She lost balance and fell on her back. Nastya, with a wild scream, raised the scissors. Mom. The cry was like an electric shock. Leosha stood in the doorway, pale as a sheet eyes full of horror. He was returning from school and stopped by to see his mom as he often did. Nastya turned for a second, distracted by the scream. That moment was enough. Leosha, without hesitation, grabbed a heavy crystal tool stand from the entrance table and hurled it at Nastya with all his strength. It struck her temple with a dull thud and clatter. Nastya gasped, staggered, her hand with the scissors dropping. But the sharp blade still grazed Dasha's raised arm, leaving a deep bloody cut from elbow to wrist. Dasha cried out in pain and shock. Nastya, swaying, clutching her head, glared at Leosha with hatred, then at Dasha bleeding. Her eyes flashed with rage and fear. Shouts and running footsteps came from the street. The noise had drawn passers-by. Nastya cursed through her teeth, dropped the bloody scissors, and bolted for the back exit. Mom. Mom Leosha rushed to Dasha, sobbing, trying to press his small hand to the gushing blood. Don't cry, son. Dasha tried to soothe him, feeling weakness from pain and blood loss. Call Leosha. He was a quick-witted boy and called Sergei, who summoned an ambulance. The patient urgently needs a transfusion. Rare blood type, not in our bank. We're searching the region, but honestly, there's not much time, the doctor admitted. Sergei clenched his fist so hard his veins bulged. I'll pull my connections, he said tightly. We'll find a donor. For Dasha, he was ready to turn the city upside down. He had many people under him, gathered blood type data, searched for salvation, like a madman, unwilling to lose his love. A few hours later, he found a match. The irony was, it was the would-be killer Anastasia caught soon after the attack. She'll agree, the investigator handling the case said confidently. She's got so much animal rage and hatred, she'd be thrilled if her victim died. At those last two words, Sergei's eyes blazed. Then make her, he roared. Isn't that your job? Do it, or I swear I'll take her blood myself. The talk with Anastasia was brief. As much as she wanted her enemy dead, a few years in prison was even less appealing. To lessen her sentence, she agreed to donate. Dasha was still unconscious during the transfusion, feeling nothing. But Anastasia felt it all. She glared with hatred at the one she was saving. Had I known how this would end, I'd have slipped poison in your tea at our first meeting. She thought venomously, clenching her fist. When it was over, Nastya was taken back to her cell and Dasha to her room. A few hours later, the patient woke. Sergei was beside her, his exhausted, sleepless face breaking into a smile. How are you? He sat closer, brushing his lips against her wrist. Alive, she whispered. How's Leosha? Her first thought upon waking was her son who'd witnessed such horror. At home with the nanny. Scared but safe. Brave kid, a hero. Sergei squeezed her hand. When Dasha asked about Nastya, he told her everything. Hearing whose blood now flowed in her, Dasha winced. It was for your life, the man said firmly. Dasha wanted to object, quip, snap back, but meeting his gaze silenced her. His green eyes held so much fear for her that she couldn't speak. She realized she had no right to such a complaint. Sergei had done everything to keep her alive. You're right. Dasha smiled gently, squeezing his rough palm. Recovery was quick. Nastya, with her promised reduced sentence, served time in a colony. Of Kirill, Dasha only knew he'd filed for divorce from prison. She signed the papers without looking. A year later, in a small registry office under soft violin strains, Dasha became Mironova. Sergei gazed at her with adoration, and Leosha, in a new suit, proudly carried the rings, his eyes glowing with happiness and calm. I won't let anyone hurt you again, the groom said firmly, glancing at the faint scar on her arm. He still blamed himself for what happened, believing he hadn't protected her. After that, Sergei banned her from salon work. Now Dasha worked with him under his watch. Not tired of me yet, she'd tease entering his office. Never, he'd reply confidently, pulling her close. A year later, a new sound filled their bright, spacious apartment, the cry of a baby girl they named Tanya. Dasha looked at her sleeping daughter in a lace cap, then at Sergei reading Leosha a fairy tale. On her hand, beside the scar from the scissors, gleamed a simple gold wedding ring. The scar reminded her of the past, the ring of a new life's start. She knew she'd paid dearly for this happiness, but it was worth it. If you like the story, I hope for your support with a thumbs up. All the best.